Hi, everyone. This is Ralph with Stroke Warrior Radio again with another interview with a provider or a resource, I should say. We're with Miss, hopefully I don't mess this up, Michelle, but we're with Michelle Taschereau.
Very nice.
All
Well
right.
said.
Michelle's a certified brain injury specialist trainer, a consultant, life and wellness coach, and advocate for accessible brain health solutions. So, welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Ralph. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you doing this very much. I'd like to get into a little. I'm always curious about how people get into things. Like the
Hmm.
radio. Somebody said, "You got a voice. Let's do radio." You
Yeah.
know, could you share your journey into brain health and rehabilitation, and what motivated you to focus on working with TBI or stroke survivors?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I did not plan on it. I'll be really honest. I kind of fell into it, like I think many people do.
Yes.
My background is in anthropology,
Oh, wow.
forensic archaeology, and that was kind of my passion. And but however, I've worked with individuals with diverse abilities for about 30 years. My daughter is autistic, and then about close to 20 years ago, my partner suffered a TBI. And
Okay.
during that time, I learned a lot over the years, as you do, as a caregiver. It opened up a whole different world, and I was really having to advocate for him in many scenarios. Unfortunately, there was insurance involved, and we're here in Canada, so our medical system is free. But when it's an automobile accident, other insurance comes into play, so it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I bet.
And yeah, so I had to advocate for him and my daughter over this past 30 years, and that kind of threw me into the world of brain injury and brain health. And I decided to share my knowledge and the tools that I learned um, with others. So I started as a community support worker and working with individuals in the community who has suffered a brain injury. I became a case manager. I became a program manager. So kind of went up the scales
Hmm.
and went into cognitive training, and eventually I'm here. I've started my own company. I am, as you mentioned, a life and wellness coach. I'm a certified brain injury specialist trainer, and in my experience, I've seen that there's a lot of gaps in our healthcare system between discharge and living real life. And so my hopes and my dreams are to help, bridge those gaps and help get the resources and the tools available into the hands of those who need them most.
That is so lacking. I mean, well, it's gotten a little better since my stroke 9.5 years ago, but I didn't know anything when I left the hospital. They
Yeah,
shared very little.
that's so common.
Yeah, it is. And no matter Europe and Canada, and we're in the United States. So yeah, it's issues with insurance, it's issues with education, all of that.
I think it's also issues of time and workload.
Yeah,
There's so many barriers, unfortunately, but we can break them down.
yeah. Um, your company again is Atlas Brain Health, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And we'll get into how they contact you when we're done. But um, describe your experience with working with patients for TBI and or
Hmm.
stroke. Do you do both?
I do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So and people with developmental disabilities as well. So
Oh, nice.
anything to do with the brain, I'm there. I'm deeply passionate about the brain. I think it's such a fascinating instrument. Um, so I've worked, as I mentioned, as a support worker with many people, and I've worked as a cognitive trainer. I've worked as a case manager, so doing facilitating their goal setting and things like that. And um, even on those capacities, you just realize the limitations that we have as the support network. you know? Um, I spent so many times thinking, there's so much more I could be doing. There's so much more I should be doing. Why don't I have those tools? Why can't I be doing this? And I found it really frustrating because there was a lot of scenarios where I knew where the tools were, but due to my employment status, I was not able to access them.
Okay.
Or I knew where the tools were, however, due to financial restraints, they weren't available to my clients. So there we're talking about those gaps and those obstacles. And you would think that in this day and age, the amount of brain injury survivors um, in our world, that there would be more of a priority to ensure that they have the tools in order to recover most efficiently. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think that that's top of priority at this time. It's kind of like our healthcare system just wants to get you so you can get home.
Yeah.
They need the space, and it's heart-wrenching for me to see that.
Well, and I think you've seen it, and you just mentioned it about the brain being such a fascinating instrument. I love that description because when we get out, we don't know what to expect. We
Hmm.
don't know how it's going to affect us. We don't know how it's going to affect our family. That's about what you address, right?
Um, some of that, absolutely. I think that after you suffer a brain injury, you're at your most vulnerable, right? Any traumatic injury, not just brain injury, but any traumatic injury, you're at your most vulnerable and you're confused and I think, our brain always goes to the negative. It's got a negativity bias. So we're looking at, the worst case scenarios all the time. And this is what's going on in our mind. And you know, we don't know where to go or what to do or how to do things. What is my life going to be like? Like you're feeling like a completely different person.
Yes,
Your identity has shifted. And
definitely.
that right there is a really, really hard pill to swallow, let alone all the other difficulties that you're facing. And so, having the tools in place to be able to, ask yourself the important questions that you need to ask, who am I now? And what makes me valuable? Because many people don't feel they have value anymore, and you do. You really, really do. And so asking those questions, what is my value? What do I have? What are my strengths? And when you start to see those, you start to lift yourself up. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of like a first step when you're discharging and understanding that the brain is extremely resilient. You know,
Yes.
it is such a remarkable thing, and you may not feel it today, but continue what you're doing, and over time, the progress happens. Our brains are constantly changing for the better or for the worse, depending on what you're feeding it. And so, and that's whether you have a brain injury or not, that's the case. So if you're not doing things to support brain health, you're doing things to support an unhealthy brain, right? So
Yeah. Did you find that you had to research? I did. I had to research. I had to self-advocate and find all the things that I thought I might need. I
mhm.
considered the only dumb question was the one I didn't ask. You
Yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
found out that I had to be the captain of my own team. And that we're not told that, we're not told we're allowed to fire doctors or therapists, you know, those kind of things. Do you find, did you find that as well? And how did you address it?
Yeah, I think that you have to be your own advocate, period. Um, and I think that we're a little bit disillusioned that we think that, everybody in our healthcare team is perfect and they know everything and they know what they're doing and they're going to do the best for us. And we fail to trust our inner self. All of us have this wonderful inner intuition and we know what's right for us. We know what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And the healthcare system is very cookie cuttered, right? It's
Yes.
checklists and it's cookie cutter. This is what we do and this is how we do it. Also, these are the resources we have available to us. So we're not going to tell you about these other resources because they're not available to us, even though they are available. And so
Right.
that's another big gap that happens. They don't want you spending your money going somewhere else for treatment that could benefit you because they want you to use their treatments, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
know it sounds terrible, and I really don't mean it to be, um, but it is a reality, that we have to face.
Yeah. It is unfortunate. One of the things that um, I was alone after my stroke. My wife had passed away, but
No, I'm sorry to hear
be
that.
involved in your coaching practice, I guess I should say. How do you involve the family and care partners in the rehabilitation process? And how do you involve the survivor themselves?
Hmm. Those are really great questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
The
get lucky.
Oh, I think there's a lot of thought put into it. Um,
Anyway,
Working with survivors is one of my favorite things. I learn so much from them because they're the most resilient people I've ever met. I've never met such determined individuals as brain injury survivors, and that is just a hard down fact. And I think a lot of people would agree with me there. Um, Saying that, their awareness is not always tip top. When you're going through recovery, sometimes there's a lack of self-awareness. Sometimes there is um, goals that you're striving for that might not be realistic. Because you're feeling good at a certain time in your life, you're like, hey, I can do this. I think I can. Um, or you're just not sure of who you are at that point. And so involving the family is so important. When there's family or caregivers involved in a recovery, the recovery is so much better. So much better. And that's scientifically proven. And involving them too gives you additional insight into how the treatment plan is going. Because sometimes, I know when I go to the gym and my trainer says to me, Michelle, how was your eating plan this week? I can say, well, I was like 80%, where my husband might go, no, she was at like 50. Right. And so having the caregivers or the family members there to support what you're hearing or what you're thinking is going on is really important. And they can give you such valuable insight as well as support the individual at home in what they're doing. When you have that connection with them, there's no barrier now. We're both working, we're collaborating together for the benefit of that individual. So it makes a really big difference.
yeah. How do you integrate various therapeutic approaches to cater to the individual needs?
Well,
I mean, for example, do you get involved with the doctors, the physical therapists, or is does a survivor need to do that as well?
so I will, as long as the survivor, gives me access or wants me to do so. So
Okay.
my role at Atlas Brain Health is strictly for the survivor or for the caregivers or families on whatever capacity or role that they want. And I truly believe that each individual has the answers within themselves and is capable of doing a lot of great, good things on their own, given the time to process the information and asking the right questions. Right. And so that's completely up to the survivor or the family if they want me to get involved. And that goes more into like a case management, which I have no issues doing whatsoever. I think that doing that collaborative care with healthcare providers, the family, the survivor, everybody is really important. And we do have social workers that do that type of treatment. However, I still think, their roles are a little bit stagnant in the sense that they're completely overloaded with work, and it is so regulated to the sense that there's so much time put on paperwork that the true the true information isn't coming forward, right? They don't have time to spend with the client to truly get to know the client. And how can you set a proper goal or several goals with your clients if you don't truly know them? You know, and I think that's a really big gap. You and I have talked about that before, is really getting to understand their needs, their wants, and what motivates them.
Yeah, exactly. It always slayed me that in the original assessment, for example, in physical therapy, they didn't take into consideration sitting down with you and not doing just the physical, but sitting down with you and doing the emotional, mental, psychological, all of that as well. Because
Yeah.
I mean, don't you find that the brain, for in my case, it took 7 years, but I don't want to use a cane or walker anymore. So I mean, it's never as good as it's going to get. Correct?
Well, everybody's brain is different, right? So I can't answer that because you have a remarkable brain and 7-year recovery is fantastic, you know. But it sounds like you've worked very diligently to accomplish that as well. And we all know that time, effort, dosage, consistency are key in any recovery.
Do you coach your clients, patients through that process? I mean, what's your initial process with a new client?
Getting to know them. So
Okay.
the first session is really just really having a discussion like you and I are having, and getting to know them, getting to know what's important in their life, what support systems that they have in place, you know, what is important for them to achieve, why is that important, you know, and really hone in on that. So it's not just asking one or two questions, it's really diving deep down into it, and then realizing what's important, why it's important, and getting them to envision that um, the outcome, right? And then once you can do that, then we have a nice anchor to that goal. Well, then we can set up the steps to get to that goal, right? And break things down nice and easily. So getting to know the clients is paramount. I mean, I know so many clinicians who know their clients on a first name basis and kind of like on that superficial level, and they do amazing work. And I just go, wow, imagine if you really knew them, right? Like,
Yeah.
imagine what that would be like if we just transitioned this just a little bit.
Yeah. I I guess the first thought that comes to my mind is one my second therapist, I guess, asked me what I wanted to do again. And I was a contractor. I said, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I could climb a ladder or hammer a nail. She brought in a ladder to a physical therapy. She brought in a board and some nails and a hammer,
Mm-hmm.
so I could relearn all that. It didn't
That's
look pretty.
wonderful.
Yeah, it didn't look pretty, but it worked.
That's okay, but I bet you can do it great now,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
It's just
Absolutely.
relearning it again. And it's that time, that consistency of doing it
Yeah.
over and over.
How do you deal with that? How do you help your clients with the that initial frustration, anger, depression? I mean, I had a lot of that anger because they didn't tell
Yeah.
me anything. How do you get through that? How would you suggest I should have gotten through that maybe?
Sorry, did you say you had a lot of anger?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that's very common. Um, Learning how to accept. Acceptance is the key, I think, to opening every single door. And it's not an easy process, you know. Um, Depression comes in very quickly, and that anger can stew, and we can perseverate on it, mainly when you have a brain injury, because that's what we tend to do. Um, And so acknowledging, I think, for me, I acknowledge what they're going through. Don't make light of it. Don't tell them it's going to be okay. And, placate. What you're going through is very hard, and it's going to continue to be hard, definitely. But as soon as you can find that acceptance, that's when you can start to move yourself forward. And not really until you have that point.
Do you find that the levels of acceptance, there's levels of acceptance that you need to go through? It's like the levels of grief. You
Mm-hmm.
have to go through the grief, There's a
Yeah.
whole grief thing after a stroke, for me
Yeah.
anyway. I lost my identity as a
Yeah.
contractor.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
and there were steps involved, aren't there?
To be honest, I think it comes down to each individual. Um, I'm certain that probably through science, scientifically based psychology or whatever there are certain steps that they recognize. But from my experience, I found that it varies between individuals. I've had clients who were very quick to accept what has happened and just extremely grateful they weren't worse, you know? So after spending a month in a coma and waking up in a hospital. I remember this one client, and she was like the happiest person you've ever met in your life. She was such a bundle of beautiful energy, and you couldn't help smile just thinking of her. And her whole life changed. She couldn't be a mother anymore. Her kids had to look after her. They were teenagers at the time. She missed one of their graduations. Her whole life changed. But she was just so grateful she had the care that she did. She was grateful she wasn't worse than what she was, and that she could still, navigate life somewhat. And that made such a difference in her recovery. So she didn't have that deep onset of anger. She just jumped right into it. And then I've met other clients that have hung on to that anger for years. And I can see that it holds them back because they're more placating into the victim role, and that doesn't allow you to move forward, unfortunately, right?
We had a show on this morning at 9 o'clock that was talking about victimization,
Mm,
how you victimize yourself, and it causes a lack of recovery. I mean,
yeah,
it hinders it, and
yeah.
it will cause mental issues or psychological issues as well. So there are a lot of steps through the whole thing. After
Mhm.
your initial assessment, what kind of work do you do with your client survivors and care partners?
Yeah, that really depends on what they want to do.
Okay.
I'm kind of at their service in a sense, right? So if you want some case management, I can do that. If you want to work on very specific goals, let's work on that. If you want some mentorship, let's work on that. So it really comes down to what their specific wants, needs, and goals are. I let them drive the bus. I'm just there as an extra supporter with some additional knowledge and tools and available.
What do you think the survivors should be asking um, to get those results from you? I mean, you do an assessment, but I think for me, it took me 6 years before I did my own assessment of the people that were helping me.
Hmm.
I mean, isn't that a step that we often neglect? And how do you? I'm not sure how to ask it. It's like, how do you get that going?
Well, I think doing continuous evaluations, right? Because you're absolutely right. It's not just the clinician or therapist or coach or whoever that should be evaluating you. You should be evaluating, your relationship with them, your results you're getting from them, and whether you feel they're adequate or not. That's equally as important. You have to know that you're in the right relationship. And, sometimes you might not be. Like you said, you fired a couple therapists, so you knew right away you weren't.
Well, I mean, some of us, like you said before, it's a checklist. They put you on the bike and walk away. That's not physical therapy. You know,
No.
there's other things that we need to do. And again, we didn't know what we didn't know. So, I mean,
But
I go ahead.
if you think about it too, when you got put on that bike, what a beautiful opportunity that would be for the therapist to get to know you better. To stand by the bike while you're doing it so they can evaluate your heart rate, your how your body is moving, how you're feeling, and ask you questions to get to know you better, you know? And then that way they can kind of figure out your strengths and how those strengths can transfer to something else. So maybe you have some strengths that can transfer into some other type of physical therapy that would benefit you more than the bike. but how are they going to know that?
Exactly.
Right? So that time on the bike is a perfect opportunity to sit back and chat.
Well, and don't you think that, I mean, it's a lifelong journey after a recovery. I
Yeah.
mean, no matter what, whether it's remarkable like mine became or whether it's not, it's a lifelong journey. So you need to develop relationships, not
Hmm.
just a clinician. I hate that word clinician because it's a, like you said, cookie cutter.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think the involvement and talking to each other is probably really important. It has been for me and helped me greatly. I mean, I have a great relationship with my therapist now. I mean, I
Yeah.
bring him food and everything because I cook Italian. But
Ah,
yeah,
there.
yeah. But
Well, I can see
you
why
know,
that's a good relationship.
yeah, it is. You want me to be a client for you now? Anyway,
So cooking is one of your strengths, I hear.
yes, it is, and it's my stress relief.
Yeah.
So on Sundays, I a traditional Italian. The sauce goes in the morning.
Nice.
I grind my pork for the Italian sausage the night before because I make my own sausage. I make my own pasta and everything.
Look
You
at
know,
the happiness that brings you. You're
yeah,
smiling like
yeah,
crazy.
it's incredible. I mean, and I started writing a cookbook at the encouragement of one of my in-laws. So I mean,
Fantastic.
it's it was hard in the beginning, just knowing what I could or couldn't do.
Yeah.
You know, um, so again, like I said before, I started doing things that I did before that I didn't think I'd ever do again, but I did them anyway, and it looked ugly as hell. But
Yeah.
I started to get better and better. I can
Yeah.
ride a bike again.
Yeah.
I fell a few times, but I can ride a bike again. So, you know, I guess part of the coaching and meeting other survivors is restoring the hope that we lost in the beginning.
That's such an important word. And I think that I get goosebumps when you say the word hope because that's something that is lacking in the healthcare community. You know, I know we used to do this cognitive program and it was remarkable. It was such a great program. And unfortunately it's not available anymore. But these I would talk to some clinicians and they'd be like, "Well, I don't want to offer false hope to my clients." And I would sit back and I would think, well, first of all, how is it false hope? Everybody's different. You don't really know what your client is capable of doing or not doing, right? We don't know for anybody what they're capable of doing. We've all seen people who have suffered, traumatic events and they've come up on top and you're like as if nothing has happened. And then other people is something so minuscule and they just, melted away. And
Right.
so we don't know what people are able to do. And so wouldn't you want to feed them that hope? Because that hope is what gives you motivation. It's what drives you. It's what allows you to actually live on purpose. And so when you don't have that hope, what's the point anymore? Right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah, that's another area that I'm I struggle with a little bit because I think that that is something that they should be teaching in medical school and all of that is to actually give that hope to individuals.
Yeah, I mean, telling you in the beginning, you're in that wheelchair, get used to it, you'll be in the rest of your life. I mean,
Mhm.
how can you say that to a patient? I mean, and that
Yeah,
lady, that lady I'm talking about doesn't is walks now with a walking stick,
yeah. And
so
that's actually doing more harm than good, right? Because
yes.
now you're giving your bias. You're setting them up for failure. You're setting them right there. This is all part of what we're talking about is part of my professional development course. And
Ah,
because these are things that really affect an individual and they might seem minuscule to people, who are working away. It's just their job, what have you. but it all matters so much. And the words that you say affect an individual so deeply. And sometimes you just might not realize that you're causing them that harm. So I know one of my friends had shoulder surgery and they said the same thing. You'll never be able to lift your arms, above the shoulder level kind of thing. So just so you know, that's how it is. Well, he can, right? He just didn't take their advice and he moved on through his physical therapy and did it. But imagine if he didn't do that and he was like, "Oh, okay, I can't." Well, as he ages, things just get worse. And so you're just setting people up for this failure based off of a bias or your own opinion, right?
True, true. And I think you probably do this in your practice. You encourage them to try anything once.
Absolutely.
You know,
What's the harm in it?
why hold
Right?
yourself back?
Yeah.
You know,
See what you're capable of doing,
yeah, yeah.
right?
We passed this saying around between a bunch of us up here in Oregon, in the stroke community, and it's you have a choice of being a survivor or becoming a warrior.
Mm,
So we consider ourselves stroke warriors.
I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a choice. At some
Yeah.
point in time, whether it be on your own or somebody like you saying, here's your choices.
Hmm.
Do you have any other ideas for what your choices are?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you do that. So I'm,
Do you find it hard? Um, I know I have, being that blunt to somebody who has struggled so immensely and has had such a traumatic event occur in their life, and it's caused them so much pain and discomfort. Sometimes those hard lines are challenging to say,
yeah,
right? Have you found
absolutely.
that as well?
Yeah, it is. But it goes back to what I think you'll agree that it goes back to that initial getting to know each other.
Yeah.
If you have a relationship, it's just like a friend or a family member. You can say anything,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you've learned enough about that person that maybe you know how to say it correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Fair
know,
enough. Yeah.
I at least that's the way I do it. I try and think of the thing I want to say before I blurt anything out.
Mhm.
You know,
That's a good skill to have.
like it's a difficult skill, believe me. But luckily, after my stroke, my temper and my patience are much better. So
Oh, that's good.
yeah, which is weird, but anyway.
Do you
um,
find do you sorry, can I ask you a question?
of
Do you
course, you can ask me whatever you want.
do you find too, I found with a lot of survivors that there were certain blessings that came to them from their injury.
Yes,
Certain things that they said, wow, like, I'm grateful that this happened because I have this now, or I'm doing this now, or what have you. Do you find that with yourself?
absolutely. As a matter of fact, often say in my interviews that they never told me it was the most difficult thing I would ever do in my life, but it became the most rewarding.
Yeah.
Because there's things I do now that I never thought I'd do. Patience, lack of temper. I'm. It's just different. My daughter told me a couple of years ago, Dad, you're so different from before your stroke. You're
Mhm.
so easier to get along with. So I mean, those
Yeah.
rewards are there from family, and you have to look for them. I think,
Yeah.
you have to
But it
look
took
for
a lot
those.
of work.
Yeah, you have a stroke or TBI is a lot of work.
Yeah.
But if you want to have a successful life, quote unquote, you got to look for those little victories,
Yeah.
every day. I mean, my first victory every day, considering that I had a stroke and went to bed and didn't call the ambulance the next day, my first victory every day now is I'm out of bed.
Mhm.
I've gotten out of bed this morning. So I'm
Mhm.
not dead, which I could have been,
Yeah.
and so many of the survivors do wind up dead,
Mhm.
So, I mean, we've got catch the wave, warriors achieving victory every day. There's
That's
something little every day you have to recognize. And I,
Mhm.
I try and get people to do that myself, but I know I do it for myself. you know.
Well, having that community and
Oh God.
having that support system is so influential, you know? It really, really is. And even take away brain injury, just as a human being, having that social connection, having those support systems, they do such good for your brain health. You know,
Yes.
it's been proven that people with dementia, part of dementia can come from social isolation, right? Not having those connections. And so it goes to show that, you know, having these connections after a brain injury, even more important. And having people who understand the stress, the anger that you're going through, the depression, how hard it is, you know? I often sit back and I remember when I was doing some case management and we'd have to do goal reports for our clients and we'd have to set 8 goals for them for each quarter. And I would think, how many people set 8 goals per quarter on a personal level? Just everyday people. How many?
Maybe
Yeah,
1%.
maybe less. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. And I'm thinking, you know, and we're pushing them so hard to do all these things. You know, like that's a lot of work. That's a lot of energy. Your whole life is being spent on rehab, on recovery, you know? And
Besides the lot of work, it's also potential for a lot of disappointment.
yes.
I mean, don't you have to address issues one at a time, I think. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I've gained a lot of weight, so I had to address that issue. And I
Hmm.
was depressed to a bad couple dark spots, you know, so I had to address those one at a time. But now it's different. You know,
Yeah.
I don't think, I don't know if you agree, but our life has changed. I mean, not only our life, but our family's life.
Yeah.
So we have to look for certain things that are beneficial for the our small community or family or whatever, plus our
Hmm.
big community. Finding other stroke survivors, oh my God, what a difference it made.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys have a lot of support groups up there, or do you do any?
We do. We do. We have like every community has at least one or two, which is fantastic. So, you know, I know Washington State actually has quite a few, which is fantastic as well. But yeah, we have some really good support networks. We have Brain Injury Canada, which kind of overviews the whole country. And then every province has their own organization, nonprofits, and then we have all the little ones in every community. So, you know, and they're fantastic because it brings people together. You get to know other people. There's a lot of intergenerational going on as well. So you have people who are 18 and you have people who are 76 and they're playing games together and getting to know each other and that's a really beautiful thing too. You know, you learn from each other that way
Absolutely.
and having people who understand what you're going through like we mentioned and you know sometimes when you go through these things you become so resourceful. I'm sure that you've realized that about yourself too, right? Like you go through hardship and you realize there's all these other ways you could be doing things and this is how you just end up living your life and those resources can be shared, you know,
Yes.
like and helpful to other people just because they're not scientifically backed or just because they're not on an app or anything, you know, they're still very, very valuable to people who need it. So yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of really ingenious ways and creative ways of doing things.
Yes. Absolutely. I, different ways to cook, different
Yeah.
ways to drive, different ways to walk. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an amazing experience, and yeah. Again, you have to decide whether you're going to be a survivor or a warrior.
Yeah, I love that.
And I
I love
think
that.
people like you give us that hope to
Mhm.
do that. So I
Mm.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
What
Thank you.
advice, talking about your professional development, what advice would you give to professionals aspiring to specialize in neuro rehab?
Mm. Take your time. Take your time. I think that anybody who's getting into our healthcare system now is at an advantage, you know, because they don't know all the ins and outs yet. And they have the advantage of making some changes along the way for themselves, right? Um, in the hospital system, you have certain check marks that you need to follow, certain rules, regulations, and that's granted, that's really important. I'm not saying it's not at all. It's extremely important.
Right.
However, there are gaps and there are areas that you can interject your own meaningful communications, and you can interject that hope. There's things you can do within the system that you can change within the system that are harmless in the system but meaningful to the individual.
Yeah.
And so take your time to think about that. Take your time learning about not just the brain, take your time learning about how the brain affects people mentally, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, every which way, because when you have a traumatic event, you are a different person. You have completely broken out of who you were, and you're catapulted into this whole new person that is just born again. And you're basically learning how to walk and talk and function again, you
Yeah.
know? And so take your time to really understand those complexities, not just the biological, not just the scientific ends, the theory, understand the human behind it.
You asked me this question, in which I'm going to be asked in a different way. But what have you found out about yourself after becoming a care partner?
Uh, I learned patience, like you. That became that. Yes, I definitely have become a very patient individual. Um, I've also learned to be an advocate and how important that is to advocate for your own care, brain injury or not, just period, advocate for your own care. Every single person needs to advocate for themselves. End of story. Um,
I love that you said that.
yeah, you just do. Otherwise, the system is flawed. It's a system. It's a very big system, and people fall through the cracks. And don't be one of those. Advocate. And not everybody knows everything. Like my doctor doesn't know anything about menopause, or like
Yeah.
like not every, there's occupational therapists who might not know about something. There's physiotherapists who might not know about something else. Like they don't know everything. We think that they do. We kind of like are raised that they have this mass amount of knowledge, and they're just people too. They're human as well. And they can only hold so much knowledge, and some of them don't continue with a lot of that research, and they don't have that thirst for knowledge. So you need to advocate for yourself and figure out what is best for you.
Yeah. I agree. What advances or changes would you like to see in the field of brain injury rehab in the next 5, 10 years?
Number one would be funding.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
I would absolutely love to see more funding put towards active care, active rehab, not just getting individuals back into community, but in community and actively participating in community with support.
Yeah.
That's what I would love to see, because I think that's where the magic happens. When you're in the hospital after your traumatic event, they've done everything that they should be doing, which is amazing. They've saved your life. But then you transition into community and you're kind of lost. You don't have those supports. There's nothing there for you. And like you said, you're not given anything. You're not given any resources. You're not given it's like, hey, see you later.
Yeah.
And it's like going into a whole different world and not understanding the language, not understanding the culture, not understanding anything, because you're so different. Everything is so different and you don't know what to do. Having that support, having those resources available, I think would create a much different world for survivors and warriors.
Yes. Yes.
I had to throw
Absolutely.
that in there.
I like it. Anything you want to add to today's conversation?
I really appreciate talking with you today. Um, You know what? I think I would love everybody to know, as a survivor or a warrior, that you are capable of so much more. Our brain is constantly changing and it thrives on novelty. It thrives on repetition. You know, if there's something you want to do, try it. Figure out how to do it. Figure out there's always a way, and there's nothing you can't really do. You know, just try it and you will find yourself in that journey. You know, we're always changing as human beings. We're constantly changing. And as a survivor or a warrior, you're constantly changing and growing too. And so by trying new things, by doing more things, you're just increasing your brain capacity, you're building on that neuroplasticity, and you're making yourself happy. Isn't that what life is about, is also being happy? So,
Yes, I agree.
yeah.
I agree. Well, thank you, Michelle. Tell us a little bit about Atlas Brain.
Yeah, thank you. Atlas Brain Health, we provide, like I said, case management or coaching or mentorship workshops and professional development courses. So we have kind of an array of services that we offer for individuals, survivors and caregivers, clinicians, healthcare workers, educators, corporate wellness as well. So we kind of cover a broad um, group. And if you want to join the newsletter, by all means, go to atlasbrainhealth.com and you can join our newsletter. And there's always some great information. We try and pump out some new things that are out on the market all the time. I'm always involved in heavy research. And because I am a certified brain injury specialist trainer, I have to stay up to date on a lot of new information just to keep my status, which of course I love because I love the brain.
All right.
And so, um, yeah, check us out and reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. And yeah, feel free to email
And
me.
it's atlasbrainhealth.com.
atlasbrainhealth.com. Your guide to better brain health.
I like that caveat. Okay. Do you also share on socials?
Yes, we are on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
I have to admit, I don't have a ton on there at this point because I've been building the professional development course that we talked about earlier. So that's been occupying a lot of my time.
But you've got several things on LinkedIn too, don't you?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I
Sorry, LinkedIn.
remember a
Yeah,
lot on there.
yeah.
That's why I contacted you. Okay.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Michelle, thank you very much. I really have enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ralph. I have really enjoyed it as well, and I'm very grateful to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Take care. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ralph. Take care.